The accusation. The New Mexico sun beat down mercilessly on the small frontier town of Silver Creek. As Cowboy Wade Morgan tied his horse to the hitching post outside the general store, he'd ridden into town for supplies, planning a quick trip before heading back to his ranch in the mountains. But the crowd gathered in the town square made him pause and look closer. In the center of the crowd, a boy of maybe 14 stood with his hands tied behind his back, his shirt torn and bloody from a recent whipping. Despite his obvious pain, the kid held his head high with a dignity that seemed far beyond his years. "That's what happens to thieves in Silver Creek," announced Sheriff Dalton, a heavy-set man with cold eyes and a reputation for harsh justice. "Let this be a lesson to anyone else who thinks they can steal from honest folks." Wade pushed through the crowd to get a better look at the boy. What he saw made his jaw tighten with anger. The kid couldn't have weighed more than 90 pounds, and the welts on his back were evidence of a brutal beating that seemed far too severe for whatever petty crime a hungry orphan might have committed. "What did he steal?" Wade asked a nearby shopkeeper. "Bread and apples from Mrs. Henderson's store." The man replied. Sheriff caught him red-handed. Wade studied the boy's face, noting the defiant set of his jaw despite the tears that streaked through the dirt on his cheeks. Something about the kid's expression didn't match the profile of a guilty thief boy. Wade called out, "What's your name?" The orphan looked up at Wade with eyes that held pain, but no shame. "Jesse Collins, sir." "Did you steal that food, Jesse?" The crowd quieted to hear the boy's answer. Jesse straightened his thin shoulders and spoke clearly despite his obvious suffering. "They whipped me for a crime I didn't commit," Jesse said, his young voice carrying across the square. "I never stole nothing from nobody." Wade felt his jaw tighten as he saw the sincerity in the boy's eyes. He'd been around enough liars and thieves to recognize the difference between guilt and innocence, and this kid was telling the truth. "Sheriff Dalton," Wade said, stepping forward, "what evidence do you have against this boy besides finding him with food?" Dalton's eyes narrowed as he recognized Wade Morgan, whose reputation as a former lawman and current successful rancher gave him standing in the community. "He was caught with stolen goods," Dalton replied defensively. "That's evidence enough." "Was he seen taking them? Did anyone witness the actual theft?" "Well, no, but nothing." Wade interrupted. "You whipped a child based on circumstantial evidence." Mrs. Henderson, the store owner, pushed through the crowd with an expression of growing concern. "Sheriff, I told you I wasn't entirely certain about what happened. I just found some items missing and saw the boy nearby." Wade turned to Jesse. "Son, tell me exactly what happened." Jesse swallowed hard, clearly fighting back tears. "I was behind the store looking through the trash for anything useful. Someone must have dropped a bag of food there, because I found bread and apples just lying on the ground. I figured someone threw them away, so I took them. I was so hungry." His voice broke slightly. "You found them in the trash?" Wade asked. "Yes, sir. I swear on my parents' graves." Wade looked around the crowd, seeing doubt beginning to creep into some faces. The story rang true, and the boy's obvious sincerity was hard to dismiss. "Sheriff," Wade said, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being heard, "did you investigate whether those items might have been accidentally dropped or thrown away?" Dalton's face reddened. "The boy had stolen goods. That's all the investigation I needed." "That's not investigation," Wade replied coldly. "That's assumption. And you beat a child based on an assumption." Subscribe to our channel for more incredible frontier stories. You won't believe what this cowboy discovers about the real crime. The crowd was beginning to murmur among themselves, and Wade could see that public opinion was starting to shift. The sight of a brutally whipped child had been disturbing enough when they thought he was guilty. Now that his innocence seemed possible, people were looking uncomfortable with what they'd witnessed. "Even if the boy is telling the truth," Dalton said defensively, "he should have asked before taking the food." "Should have asked who?" Wade demanded. "If he found it in the trash, who exactly should he have asked? And since when do we whip children for salvaging discarded food?" Jesse spoke up again, his voice stronger now that someone was listening to him. "Mr. Morgan, I've been on my own for 2 years since my folks died. I've never stolen anything in my life. I work when I can find it, and I only take what people throw away." Wade felt his anger building as he looked at this brave kid who'd maintained his dignity. Even while being unjustly punished, the boy reminded him of himself at that age, orphaned and trying to survive in a world that seemed stacked against anyone, without money or connections. "Mrs. Henderson," Wade said, turning to the store owner, "do you want to press charges against this boy?" The elderly woman looked at Jesse's torn and bloody back and shook her head emphatically. "Absolutely not. If he found the food in my trash, he's welcome to it. I throw away day-old bread all the time." "There you have it, Sheriff," Wade said. "No crime, no victim, no case. I suggest you untie this boy immediately." But Sheriff Dalton's pride was now on the line, and he wasn't ready to back down in front of the entire town. The boy was caught with goods that didn't belong to him, Dalton insisted. "In my jurisdiction, that's theft, regardless of where he claims he found them." Wade studied the sheriff's stubborn face and realized that this wasn't really about justice or stolen food. This was about a man in authority who didn't want to admit he'd made a mistake, especially a mistake that had resulted in the brutal whipping of an innocent child. "Sheriff Dalton," Wade said quietly, his voice taking on a dangerous edge, "you have two choices. You can untie this boy and apologize for your mistake, or you can explain to the territorial marshal why you tortured a child without proper evidence." The threat was unmistakable, and Dalton understood that Wade Morgan had both the influence and the determination to follow through on it. But the sheriff's pride wouldn't let him back down gracefully. "This is my town," Morgan, Dalton said. "I don't take orders from ranchers." "Then you'll take them from me," said a new voice from the edge of the crowd. Everyone turned to see a man wearing a federal marshal's badge approaching through the crowd. Marshal Tom Bradley was a respected lawman whose jurisdiction superseded any local sheriff's authority. "I was riding through town when I heard about this incident," Bradley said, his eyes taking in Jesse's condition with obvious disapproval. "Sheriff Dalton, what evidence did you have to justify this punishment?" As Dalton stammered through his weak justification, Wade realized that Jesse Collins had just found more than one ally in his fight for justice. The question now was whether they could not only clear the boy's name, but also ensure that Sheriff Dalton faced consequences for his abuse of power. Marshal Tom Bradley's arrival had changed the entire dynamic in the town square, where Sheriff Dalton had been the ultimate authority moments before. He now found himself being questioned by someone with superior jurisdiction and a reputation for thorough investigation. "Let me see if I understand this correctly," Bradley said, pulling out a notebook. "You whipped this boy because you found him with bread and apples. That may or may not have been stolen from Mrs. Henderson's store. He was caught red-handed with the goods," Dalton insisted, though his voice had lost much of its earlier confidence. "Were you an eyewitness to any theft?" Bradley asked. "Well, no, but did Mrs. Henderson witness any theft?" "She reported items missing, and the boy was found with them." Bradley turned to Mrs. Henderson. "Mum, can you tell me exactly what you reported to the sheriff?" The elderly store owner wrung her hands nervously. "I noticed some day-old bread and overripe apples were missing from my counter. I mentioned it to Sheriff Dalton when he stopped by for coffee. I never asked him to arrest anyone." "And where exactly was this boy found with the allegedly stolen items?" "Behind my store," Mrs. Henderson admitted, "near the trash bins where I throw out spoiled goods." Bradley made careful notes while Wade helped Jesse sit down on a nearby bench. The boy was clearly in pain from his whipping, but his eyes remained alert and hopeful as he watched the marshal work. "Jesse," Bradley said gently, "tell me your version of events." Jesse's story was consistent with what he'd told Wade earlier. He'd been searching for discarded food when he found the bread and apples apparently thrown away behind the store. Desperate from hunger, he'd taken them without thinking to ask permission. "How long since you last ate?" Bradley asked. 3 days, sir," Jesse replied quietly. "I've been walking from Albuquerque, looking for work or family that might take me in." Wade felt his anger deepen at the image of this kid walking alone across the territory, hungry and desperate, only to be brutally punished for trying to survive. "Sheriff Dalton," Bradley said, his voice taking on a stern tone, "territorial law requires reasonable evidence before punishment is administered, especially corporal punishment of a minor. Can you explain why you didn't investigate further before ordering this whipping? Dalton's face reddened. The boy had the stolen goods. What more investigation was needed? Considerable more. Bradley replied sharply. You failed to verify that. A crime had actually occurred. You failed to establish criminal intent. And you failed to consider alternative explanations for how the boy came to possess the items. Marshal Bradley, Wade interjected. There's something else you should know. I've been asking around while you questioned the sheriff. Several people saw Sheriff Dalton drinking heavily at the saloon before this incident occurred. A murmur went through the crowd as this new information sank in. The idea that Dalton might have been intoxicated when he ordered Jesse's punishment added another layer of outrage to an already disturbing situation. Is this true, Sheriff? Bradley demanded. I had a drink with lunch, Dalton admitted sullenly. That doesn't mean. It means your judgment was impaired when you made the decision to brutally punish a child. Bradley interrupted. This gets worse by the minute. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, her face pale with guilt. Marshal, I need to say something. After Sheriff Dalton left my store, I found the missing items. They were still there, just misplaced behind some other goods. I never got a chance to tell him before he hurt the boy. Subscribe to our channel now. The shocking revelation that completely changes everything is about to unfold. The silence that followed Mrs. Henderson's confession was deafening. Jesse hadn't stolen anything because there had been nothing stolen. The bread and apples he'd found behind the store had indeed been discarded items, exactly as he'd claimed. You're telling me, Wade said, his voice deadly quiet, that this boy was whipped for a crime that never happened. Mrs. Henderson nodded. Miserably, I tried to find Sheriff Dalton to tell him, but by then the punishment had already been carried out. Bradley closed his notebook with a snap that seemed to echo through the square. Sheriff Dalton, you are hereby suspended from duty pending a full territorial investigation into this incident. Your badge and weapon, please, you can't do this. To me, Dalton protested. I've been the law in this town for 8 years, and in those 8 years, how many other innocent people have you punished based on poor judgment and inadequate investigation? Bradley demanded. Your conduct today suggests a pattern of abuse that needs thorough examination. As Dalton, reluctantly, surrendered his badge and gun, Wade knelt beside Jesse to check his injuries. The boy's back was a mess of welts and cuts that would take weeks to heal properly. Son, Wade said gently, you need medical attention. Doc Peterson should take a look at those wounds. I don't have money for a doctor. Jesse said quietly, you don't need money. Wade replied firmly, this is going to be taken care of properly. Marshal. Bradley approached them as the crowd began to disperse, many people looking ashamed of their earlier enthusiasm for Jesse's punishment. Mr. Morgan, Bradley said, I understand you have a ranch outside town. Would you be willing to provide temporary accommodation for Jesse while he recovers? The territorial government will compensate you for his care. Wade looked down at Jesse, seeing hope and fear warring in the boy's eyes. The kid had been betrayed by authority figures and hurt by people who should have protected him. But he was still brave enough to hope that someone might actually help him. Jesse, Wade said, how would you like to come stay at my ranch for a while? I could use some help with the horses, and you could use some good meals and a safe place to sleep. You mean it, sir? Jesse asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I mean it, Wade confirmed. And son, nobody's ever going to hurt you like that again. Not while I'm around. As they prepared to leave for the doctor's office and then Wade's ranch, both man and boy understood that this chance encounter had changed both their lives. Wade had found someone to mentor and protect, while Jesse had found the kind of guardian he'd been hoping for since his parents died. But the real test of their new relationship would come when they learned that Sheriff Dalton's supporters weren't ready to accept his disgrace quietly, and that standing up for justice sometimes required more courage than either of them had imagined. 3 weeks had passed since Jesse Collins had come to live at Wade Morgan's ranch, and the transformation in the boy was remarkable. Proper food, medical care, and most importantly, the security of knowing he was wanted and protected had helped heal more than just his physical wounds. Jesse had proven to be intelligent, hardworking, and surprisingly knowledgeable about horses despite his young age. Wade found himself genuinely enjoying the boy's company and had begun thinking of their arrangement as permanent rather than temporary. But their peaceful routine was shattered one evening when a group of riders approached the ranch house just after sunset. Wade counted 6 men, and something about their purposeful approach made him instinctively reach for his rifle. "Jesse," Wade said quietly, "go inside and stay away from the windows." "Is it trouble, Mr. Morgan?" Jesse asked, his voice tight with the fear of someone who'd learned not to trust unexpected visitors. "Maybe. Just do as I say." The riders were led by Ben Dalton, Sheriff Dalton's older brother and a prominent rancher in the territory. Behind him rode 5 other men, all armed and wearing expressions that suggested they hadn't come for a social visit. "Wade Morgan," Ben Dalton called out as they approached the house. "We need to talk." "Then talk," Wade replied, stepping onto his porch with the rifle held casually but visibly. "It's about my brother," Ben said, dismounting but keeping his hand near his gun. "You ruined his career over some worthless orphan boy." "Your brother ruined his own career by torturing an innocent child," Wade replied evenly. "I just made sure the truth came out." "The truth?" Ben laughed harshly. "The truth is that my brother kept the peace in Silver Creek for 8 years. The truth is that he's a good man who made one small mistake." "Beating a child for a crime that never happened isn't a small mistake," Wade said. "It's a serious abuse of power that could have killed that boy." One of the other riders, a hard-looking man named Crenshaw, spoke up. "The boy's trouble, Morgan. He'll steal from you first chance he gets. Orphans like that are born bad." Wade felt his anger rising at the casual cruelty of the statement. "Jesse Collins is one of the finest young men I've ever met. He's honest, hardworking, and braver than any of you." "Brave," Ben Dalton sneered. "He cried like a baby when he got what he deserved." That comment pushed Wade past his limit for patience. He was whipped until his back was raw for a crime he didn't commit. Any tears he shed were justified. "Which brings us to why we're here," Ben continued. "My brother's reputation is ruined. His career is over. And it's all because you couldn't mind your own business. We're here to balance the scales." Wade studied the 6 men facing him and realized they'd come looking for violence. Whatever they had planned, it wouldn't end with conversation. "What exactly are you proposing, Dalton?" "Simple justice," Ben replied. "You and the boy disappear, and my brother's name gets cleared. He says he was right all along, that the boy ran off because he was guilty, and that you were just some bleeding heart fool who got in the way. And if I refuse, then accidents happen," Crenshaw said with a cold smile. "Ranchers living alone sometimes face terrible misfortunes. Fires, stampedes, falls from horses. Very tragic." Wade felt a familiar calm settle over him, the same feeling he'd experienced during his years as a lawman when situations turned deadly. These men had come to threaten a child and were prepared to commit murder to protect their own. "Gentlemen," Wade said quietly, "I'm going to give you one chance to ride away from here and forget this conversation ever happened." "Or what?" Ben Dalton demanded. "Or you'll discover that threatening children is a dangerous business." Subscribe to our channel for more incredible frontier stories. You won't believe the courage this man shows protecting his young ward. The standoff might have continued, but it was interrupted by an unexpected voice from the shadows. "Actually," said Marshal Tom Bradley, stepping into view with his gun drawn, "threatening federal witnesses is a federal crime." Wade wasn't entirely surprised to see the marshal. He'd sent word to Bradley about the threats that had been circulating around town, and the lawman had apparently decided to investigate personally. "This is a private matter, Marshal," Ben Dalton said, though his confidence had clearly been shaken by Bradley's appearance. "No, it's not," Bradley replied. "Jesse Collins is a witness in a federal investigation into your brother's conduct. Any attempt to harm him or interfere with his testimony is a federal offense." Crenshaw's hand moved toward his gun, but stopped when he realized that both Wade and Bradley had their weapons trained on the group. "Federal investigation?" Ben Dalton asked. "Your brother's case has revealed a pattern of abuse that goes back years," Bradley explained. "The territorial government is reviewing every case he handled and Jesse's testimony is crucial evidence. What the group didn't know was that Jesse himself was watching from an upstairs window, and the courage he'd learned from Wade was giving him an idea. "Mr. Dalton," Jesse called down from the window, "if you want to know about your brother, maybe you should ask the Rodriguez family about what he did to their son, or the Mitchell family about their daughter." Ben Dalton's face went pale. "What's he talking about? Your brother has been abusing his authority for years," Bradley said. "Jesse's case was just the one that finally brought it to light. We've found at least 6 other instances of excessive force against children and young people." Wade watched as the fight went out of Ben Dalton and his men. They'd come expecting to intimidate a lone rancher and an orphan boy. Instead, they'd walked into a federal investigation that threatened to expose years of corruption and abuse. "This isn't over," Ben Dalton said, but his heart clearly wasn't in the threat anymore. "Yes, it is," Bradley replied firmly. "Your brother is finished as a lawman, and anyone who tries to interfere with this investigation will join him in federal prison." 6 months later, Wade Morgan stood in the courthouse in Santa Fe as a judge made his guardianship of Jesse Collins official. The boy who'd been whipped for a crime he didn't commit was now legally part of a family that would protect and nurture him. Sheriff Dalton had been sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for abuse of power, and the investigation had led to reforms in how territorial law enforcement handled cases involving children and vulnerable citizens. "Are you ready to be Jesse Morgan?" Wade asked as they left the courthouse. "I've been ready since the day you stood up for me," Jesse replied with a smile that showed how far he'd come from the terrified, brutalized boy Wade had first seen in Silver Creek. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories of justice, protection, and chosen family from the American frontier. Hit that subscribe button now, because these tales prove that standing up for the innocent is always worth the risk. As they rode back to their ranch, both father and son understood that family wasn't just about blood or legal documents. It was about the choice to protect each other, to fight for justice even when it was dangerous, and to never let innocent people suffer when you had the power to help them. The cowboy's jaw had tightened when he heard about injustice, but his heart had opened when he chose to act on that anger, proving that sometimes the most important thing a man can do is simply refuse to let cruelty triumph over innocence. Your subscription helps us continue bringing these incredible tales of frontier justice and family bonds to life. Subscribe now and join us for more amazing stories that prove anyone can be a hero when they choose to protect those who cannot protect themselves.